Hey, what's up? Hope everyone's doing all right today. So today is week 5, and it's Exodus 36 through Leviticus 15. And so when you have the end of Exodus and you go through Leviticus, at the end of Exodus, or towards the end, you have the Ten Commandments, or what we refer to as the Ten Commandments, the two tablets, and then the commandments that God writes, and the Ten Commandments that they do refer to that. And then so you start getting this instruction from God, and this instruction that you get from God seems to be just kind of the way that man should live. It's like it's how to live healthy, how to live wealthy, and how to live wise. And so it's just like these routines and things that man needs to do, or these ideas that man needs to do, or these like things that man needs to do in order to be healthy, wealthy, and wise. Really, that's how I feel, at least. And you get a lot of that towards the end of Exodus, and a lot of it in Leviticus. And I think there's also some in Numbers and Deuteronomy. And so the Numbers and Deuteronomy is a lot of also genealogy. But this is kind of like the first 4 books, or the books of Moses. And so these are some really good information that you get. And but for this week, it's for Monday, I have how to use the tabernacle and its purpose. And so the tabernacle, was where God was present, and like what was his purpose. And so, and they God explains to the Jews how to, how to use it, or how to make the tabernacle. But I don't think he necessarily explains so much of it as his purpose, and how to exactly use it. So it seems to be this is kind of where God dwelt. And so I think it's kind of up to each one of us to determine what God wants from us. And so I think a lot of times we want to get something from God, like why would God do this, and why would this thing come about? But really, we need to think about how we can understand what God wants, and make it more about us understanding and us doing the work than I think God doing the work. God has done enough work, and so like it's important for us to do the work that we need to do in order to understand what God wants from us. And so I don't think a lot of times God explains things the way that some people would like. I think that sometimes people are like, okay, well, God didn't explain this correctly or well enough for me to understand, so therefore I don't have to do it. Instead of trying to do the work in order to understand what God wants from you. And I think it's really difficult. And so I think that a lot of times when we read the Bible and it's okay, what are these things? God needs to explain it better. Why did God explain it this way? Instead of thinking like that, we want to explain, okay, how do I understand this? Take it as reality, and it's your job or your duty to understand it and to move forward in doing so. And so the purpose, I think, of the tabernacle is for somewhere for God to dwell, and so that man can know that God is with him. And in the end of Leviticus, and I'm sorry, the end of Exodus and start of Leviticus, it seems to be that God was like in the tabernacle, like a cloud was in the tabernacle, so God was always present with them. And when the cloud moved and was came up, or the I'm not sure if it was fire, or exactly remember what it was exactly, but it allowed the Jews know when to move, and to know that God was with them all the time. And so I think this is kind of experience of God being in the presence all the time of the camp of the Jews was just be hard to really imagine today. I think a lot of times people are like, okay, if I just only knew God existed. But the more God exists, the more I think is expected from you, because you're no longer ignorant. And so this has a new set of problems. There's a new set of not problems necessarily, but difficulties that one has to endure. And so a lot of times it's like, oh, be careful what you wish for. And but that might be true to some cases. But I think it's important to try to do away with ignorance as much as possible, and to know the truth, and to know that God exists is better than to know that God doesn't exist. The doubt is worse than the problems that come, or the difficulties that come along with knowing God exists is a lot better than the difficulties that go along with not knowing God exists. So there are more difficulties for knowing what God exists, but it's far worse, I feel like, to know that God doesn't exist. Those difficulties are far more extreme than the difficulties that arise when you know that God exists, or you are more certain that God exists. And so Tuesday had mandatory sacrifices, sin offerings, trespass offerings. And so it's really difficult for me to understand the difference between a sin offering and a trespass offering, and a lot of these different offerings that they have. You can Google and get the information, but I don't always trust Google anymore, especially for like information. So it's really difficult for me to understand the different sin offerings and how they are. And I don't necessarily think, for me at this point in my life, it's really too important for me to understand the differences between those. I don't think that's what God necessarily wants me to understand, or is putting in my heart to understand the differences. but mainly just to know that when they did the trespass offerings, it was a way for people to have accountability for the sins that they made, and it was also a way for everybody to come together and to do these things. And a lot of people, I think, when they think of these offerings, that they just burn them up, but they actually ate a big part of it. And so it was also the different feasts and stuff like that. So it was a way to feed the people with these different offerings, and to have accountability for the things that you do, because everyone sins, and just to know that there is accountability for your sin, you have to pay for it. Okay, and then on Wednesday, I did try to think about voluntary offerings, burnt offerings, grain offerings, and peace offerings. And once again, these are difficult for me to understand the difference between all these different types of offerings: the sin offerings, the trespass offerings, the grain offerings, the burnt offerings, and the peace offerings. These are really difficult for me to kind of grasp the difference between each of them and how each of them are done. And I think that for some people, they can look into this. And I think as I progress with my studies and my understanding of the Bible, and God speaks to me more and more, will be able to understand it and be able to give a better explanation between the differences of these things. But right now, it's just kind of beyond my grasp and understanding. But hopefully one day I can get there and do it better. And then for Thursday, I have what the children of Israel can and cannot eat. And I think this is just to make somebody healthy, especially at that time, because a lot of the food that they were told to eat, I think, were just healthy items to choose from, or maybe items that are easier to cook, or maybe items that are animals that were easier. And I also think it's possible that other things are going along, because I do think animals are sentient, and the idea of animals being self-aware. I think animals are sentient in the sense of being self-aware. I think they are. I think everything alive pretty much is self-aware, but I don't think that they're self-aware or their existence is anything like being a human. I think that being a man, how I view reality and how a dog views reality are so different. I couldn't even comprehend how a dog views reality, let alone a plant. But I do think that they are self-aware in the sense that they know that they exist. Beyond that, I don't know. But I do think that animals are sentient. I do think that they are sentient in the sense that they are self-aware. And so what's going on with these offerings and these trespass, or what's going on with both these offerings and what the people can and can't eat, I think is something also to do with the animals and God's interaction with them, and how he plays things out. What is it? Is it positive for an animal to be sacrificed and be killed and eaten by man? It might be a positive thing for that animal, and that might be so strange to us to try to fathom that idea, but it might be something that's a blessing to that animal. How's a blessing? I don't know. Or it could be something that's a punishment to that animal, and I wouldn't be surprised either way. But I do think there's something else going on there inside, the animal realm, and why God does this with man more than just for man. I don't think man's the only reason why God does the things that he does for man, because man is like, the caretaker of the earth. And so we're in charge of the earth. And I think that the things that God does to us and for us is also to benefit his other creatures, the other beings of this earth, of the plane. And I don't think people really understand that too much. And I don't understand the nuances, or even if that's true or not. And it's not really explained to us more than we are just to go out and control the land. And so he doesn't tell us. The Bible never says anything about, man is supposed to do this and do that for the animals, and because the animals are good, the animals are bad. And it might be because we have nothing to do with the animals. It's completely separate. And it might be due because God just doesn't want to explain it to us, because he explains enough to us already. The Bible is pretty long. We have a lot of things to try to understand, and to understand the different nuances between how man interacts with animal, and what man's place is inside the world as far as caretaker, and how the animals interact with that. It'd be really difficult to understand, especially because the Bible is already so difficult to understand as it is. But maybe one day, if man can grasp enough knowledge and understanding of what he's meant to understand now, then God will give him more information to chew on and to understand about the different interactions that he has with his environment and his place, or what his place is. And then so on Friday, I have how to deal with plagues and leprosy. And so the priest, I think, was really interesting that I don't hear it discussed very often, is the priests were actually doctors, in the sense that they would diagnose leprosy and plagues, and they would know how to act and what to do. And so the priests were not only spiritual leaders, but they were also the doctors inside the community. They went and diagnosed the different things, and they told man how to do it, and they were given by God to tell, or God told them how to do it, and then they were diagnosing. They were the doctors of the time, and the priests had a lot of authority, a lot of power, and they did a lot, and they would diagnose leprosy, and they were told what to do with leprosy. And so they would read this, and they would go out to the people, and they would handle it. And I just think that the priest had a lot of responsibilities. And I always think it's interesting too, when because Aaron, he the people came to him and gave him their earrings, and they made the golden calf, and a lot of them died. But Aaron became one of the high priests of God, and so he did this thing where he made the calf, and all these people died because of it. But God didn't necessarily hold him, you know, completely responsible, or at least he forgave him and made him priest in his own order. And so I think certain people just have certain difficulties that they have to go through, and how God judges each person and their difficulties is different than how he judges another person's difficulties. And so you might see somebody and be like, oh man, I can't believe that person did that. But with the life that they have and the difficulties they've been given and the struggles they've been given, the thing that you see as horrible might be to God really great, that's the only thing that they're doing, or that they're struggling with this problem, or they're struggling with their struggles, but they're overcoming them even though they fall short at times. So I just always think it's difficult to look at somebody and be like, okay, well, that person's a horrible person because they're doing this horrible thing. That's not a struggle for me, so therefore um, it's not that hard to deal with, and because I don't have to struggle with it, then it's a really important thing not to struggle with. And so I just think it's really difficult to do that, and we're told not to judge another man's servant, and so we're not to judge people and condemn them. We want to have just judgment, like we want to be able to hold people accountable, but we don't want to condemn. So you want to hold people accountable, but you don't want to condemn. And it's very difficult, and that's why you have to have knowledge, and you have to be part of the truth in order to, and have a relationship with your Creator in order to see the difference between judging and condemning, or assessing and condemn, or holding accountable and assessing, and then condemning and damning. So yeah, I just think that's really important. I always thought that was kind of interesting with Aaron. Um, and so I just think that Exodus and Leviticus, and the end of Exodus, it gets into a lot of the rules in Leviticus, at least to the 15th of what I was read this last week. As I remember, it's just a lot of different rules and how to handle certain things. And it's just interesting. And, before I wouldn't find it interesting as much as I do now, but now I find it quite interesting. And I think before, a lot of times, because I didn't have the faith that I needed, if I would have read this, or this would have been taught to me, it would have probably hurt my faith more, because I didn't understand the grand scheme of things. I didn't have the faith that was needed in order to help me to build more faith. I didn't have a foundation enough that was strong enough to be able to hold, or to be able to um, take the criticism and the critiques, and the just the bad stuff, and the false, the lies, and just like the criticism of how this could possibly happen, and how these things are really bad. And but now that I feel like I have a foundation of truth as far as what God is, and that God exists, that I can handle a lot of the criticisms and ideas that are thrown my way, as far as these early things that happen. And so I think it's important for each of us to have our own path forward, and how and what God wants from us, and to live it accordingly, and to help each other. But at any rate, I hope everyone's doing okay. And so, yeah, this is week 5, Exodus 36 through Leviticus 15. And I went over, Monday is because like I said, these are the things that I deal with, or I try to self-reflect on each day. And so Monday was how to use the tabernacle and its purpose. Tuesday was mandatory sacrifices, sin offerings, trespass offerings. Wednesday was voluntary offerings, burnt offerings, grain offerings, and peace offerings. Thursday was what the children of Israel can and cannot eat. And Friday was how to deal with plagues and leprosy. And so I also write down in the video description of what each day is. And, I hope one day that everybody can have a calendar like this, and they can have this same idea, and it could be something that could be beneficial for the church. So I hope everyone's doing okay, and God bless, and happy truth seeking.